ecology because they're very, very cryptic and secretive. But so these are, again, these are the number of species we have. Uh, and I gave this talk last year. So last year there was 7,668 frogs, okay? And there was 816 salamanders, and then there was 222 species of coelacanths. So if we fast forward to today, I went back and checked the updated species counts. We have now gained, about 200 new species of frogs, and we've gained, a few more species of salamanders, and we've also gained about three more species of caecilian. So this is kind of just showing that, as time goes on, we're always discovering new species. A lot of amphibians are not very well surveyed, and they're kind of, I guess, found in these, um, I guess these hard to get to habitat types. And they live in these remote areas sometimes. And again, they're very, very secretive. A lot of amphibians exclusively live underground. So they can be very, very hard to detect in the wild. So it's super it's super cool that we, as time goes on, we're actually seeing more species get discovered. Um, that's a pretty cool little nitbit. But okay. And so what actually is a frog? So frogs, if you were to look at kind of like an evolutionary tree, they are a group that basically evolved about 300 million years ago. So they're actually older than mammals. I think mammals evolved about 225 million years ago. Um, and again, we have these three different groups. We have the caecilians, and then we have, I guess, the split between, salamanders and frogs, which are kind of, again, a more recent groups. And I do have a slide on caecilians because, and this is the only slide I have on them. This is not a Sicilian talk, but I figured I'd try to like give you guys some cool facts about these guys because otherwise they kind of get swept under the rug a little bit. But they can be, so they're such a weird group of animals. They're very diverse. Some of them look like worms. Some of them look like snakes. They can be terrestrial or aquatic. So some species live only in the water. Some species live pretty much underground their entire lives. But what's really cool about this species is that they have this, I guess, sensory tentacle. No one really, I don't know if anyone really knows exactly what the sensory tentacle is used for, but it's thought to help for detecting chemical cues and signals. So a lot of people think it's for prey detection and navigation through environments in which they can't see very well. So it's kind of like an environmental sensor, if you will. And and some of them also have these like, and these are just some. I really like skulls. So this is an example of a skull from one species, and you'll notice that the skull is again very robust and very thick, dermally speaking. So this is a skull that's pretty much designed and adapted to dig underground. So the way the skull is shaped is basically like kind of goes to show of how like fossorial these creatures are. And this is, some of them look cute. Like this one in the bottom looks like a little worm. It's kind of cute, but this one just looks scary. The one that has all these teeth. I think it kind of looks like an alien. So again, this is a very weird, diverse group. I encourage you if you're really interested in this group of animals to do some more research on them on your own because they have again incredible diversity and incredible different ecologies. Okay. Okay, so what actually is a frog? So the order of frogs is called Anura, and that's Latin, and what it means is it means without a tail. So it's like kind of an animal without a tail. But some of you may be thinking, okay, well, what about tadpoles? Tadpoles have tails, right? And that is true. So there are exceptions to the without a tail definition. Frogs are biphasic, so they have a tadpole stage, which is generally kind of this aquatic stage, and then when they, metamorph and become terrestrial stage, they kind of lose this tail or reabsorb this tail. And there's another exception to this kind of rule to, without a tail. And there's this one species of frog, it's called a tailed frog. But this is kind of misleading because it's not actually a true tail. So their tail doesn't really have any vertebrae or bone structure. Instead, it's kind of an extension of its digestive tract. And another weird thing about this frog is that So most frogs use external fertilization, but this frog actually uses internal fertilization. So it's kind of doing the opposite of what most frogs do. And then the other thing that's also really weird about this frog is that they don't call. So most frogs have this, acoustic signaling that they do. Like this frog just doesn't do, and this frog doesn't do that either. So this is a very, very weird frog in terms of, how it fits into the rule of, what it means to be a frog. But I thought that's a unique thing that should be included here. So okay, so yeah, so most frogs, besides that one I just showed you, use external fertilization. So basically what happens is, during the breeding season, usually males are calling and then females will be selective towards those males. So a female might pick a male because she likes the way that male is calling, and then the male will clasp the female, and then that female will deposit eggs, and then the male will deposit sperm, and then that sperm will basically fertilize those eggs, and then that egg will develop into an embryo, and that embryo will develop into a tadpole, and then eventually that tadpole will develop into a terrestrial frog. But it's not always that easy, right? So there's exceptions to almost everything I say in this talk. So there's actually, and fair warning, this is going to be kind of a gross slide, I think. So this is called the Suriname toad. And so everything works the same in terms of like the external fertilization, right? There's the egg. So I'll explain it here. So the female lays all these eggs, uh, and I think the male like courts her in some unique way, but the female lays the eggs. The male pushes the eggs on the female's back, and then those eggs basically stick to the female's back, and then this female undergoes some physiological change, and eventually those eggs kind of get absorbed into her skin. Um, and what happens is it's these toadlets eventually come out of her skin because again, this is kind of like a protection barrier. Like they're at this vulnerable stage in life, so this is kind of giving them kind of a boost for a chance on survival after they're out of their eggs. But what happens is they kind of skip the tadpole stage. Right, remember that last slide, most frogs have this, tadpole stage when they're in the water. So essentially what happens is you call this direct development. So the tadpole stage actually happens kind of inside the egg. So they're kind of skipping the tadpole stage here, but then they come out as these little, people call them toadlets. So that kind of gives them some type of competitive advantage instead of being this free roaming tadpole that's just kind of in the environment. I think this is a very, very cool frog. Another cool thing about this frog is that they they do call. So they live exclusively underwater. They're totally aquatic, but they still call. So they make these clicking sounds underwater, which can be basically picked up by the females still. So you don't have to be to call. You don't have to be terrestrial. So I think that's fantastic and super interesting. Um, and so yeah, again, so yeah, most frogs do have these mating calls. And so these calls are not only served, or the purpose of these calls is not only to attract mates, it's not only to attract females, but it's also used as a warning signal to other males. So as a frog is calling, it's again, it's trying to attract a mate in most cases, but it can also be used to warn other male frogs like, hey, like I'm in my own territory, stay out of my space, type of signal, right? So, a lot of frogs are territorial and they kind of, want to establish their space so that they can have a better chance of, obtaining a female. So a lot of these, some frogs have certain aggressive calls that they can do on top of like a normal advertisement call that can be kind of more uh, signaling, more of a signal to another male that, like is of a warning, like, hey, I've already claimed this space. And then some frogs will assess other frogs, and this, maybe another frog says, okay, I don't really care, like, I'm bigger than you, I have, better traits, I'm gonna take your space. So again, it doesn't work all the time, right? Frogs will fight in some cases. And there is again a lot of diversity in these calls too. So some frogs have they make all sorts of different noises. Most frogs, their name comes from how their call sounds. But you can see that in this top picture, this is just a generic tree frog. You can see they have like one big vocal sac, but a lot of frogs also have dual vocal sacs. So they have kind of the vocal sacs coming from the side of their basically of their head rather than right under their head. So again, a lot of diversity here. And then I'm going to try to play a few different frog calls too. Okay, so let's see if this works. So that same drift fence pond I was talking about before, where I d did the study. So I want it for anyone listening to the talk, I want you to listen very carefully, and I want you to try to figure out how many species are calling. So not how many individuals, but try to guess how many species are calling. And then after we listen for a little bit, I'll give you the answer. But just pay attention to the different sounds that you hear. So we'll see if anyone gets this right. I think you got this. So we'll play this video. Okay, so that I don't know if I can't technically see the chat right now, but if you guessed three species, you got it right. Um, so congrats, but it's a little bit tricky because and this is actually what happens in nature a lot. A lot of the time when you go to a certain pond at night, there's not going to be just one species there. Usually there's multiple species, and so sometimes it can be kind of difficult to assess maybe how many species are there because a lot of their calls can overlap. Some frog species are louder than others, but if you remember that video, there was kind of this like chuckling call. It kind of sounded like an evil laugh. That was a leopard frog call, and then you kind of notice that more low frequency like humming sound. That was a bullfrog, and then there were these kind of like these crickety noises. It's kind of hard to explain, but it sounded like kind of like a rattling sound. Those are those little tiny chorus frogs. So I think it's really cool that even those little tiny frogs can be just as loud in some cases as those really big frogs, despite them being a lot smaller in size. Okay. Okay, and yeah, so these are this is what the species look like. So again, your bullfrogs, you get your leopard frogs here, and then your really small chorus frogs. So yeah, that's just and that there's I think we had about 11 species in total in that pond. So you can imagine like what a pond would sound like with even more than three species, right? Um, and so I'm going to just play a few different species of calls. So that last one I showed was a southern leopard frog, but here's a northern leopard frog. This is where they range. You can see this is a similar species to the last one I just played. But you can definitely tell it's a lot different. So I'll play this one too. So a little bit similar to the other leopard frog that you heard in the other video, but still a lot of variation. And you can see that this frog also has the kind of that dual vocal sac. Um, and then this is what's called an eastern spadefoot toad. So this is also this is an explosive breeder. So they breed for like very short durations of time. But when they do breed, they breed in like hundreds of individuals. So like if you were to witness a breeding event, you would probably see like a massive either migration or a massive amount of males calling at the same time, which I haven't seen before and I hope to see someday. But this is what their calls sound like.
Hey, sorry to interrupt,
Oh yeah,
but they're saying that they cannot hear the videos.
oh man, okay. That's too bad. I will see. I maybe let's see if I go to my settings. Video settings. Well, yeah, I guess if show me
Okay, I'm
yeah, I
getting
mean,
help right now.
okay. Maybe, yeah, it might be on my end. I apologize. You gotta have the imagination of what they sound like. No,
If you stop sharing,
yeah, of course.
and then when you share,
Okay. Let's see what happens.
make sure that you click on that button that says uh, share audio. Oh, share sound is checked. and then optimize for video sharing. So once those both are done,
So when I click, is it sharing my screen again? Because
yeah.
when I clicked share, it doesn't give me the option to, I guess, select settings. So I'm wondering if I,
Oh, right before you share, when it
okay,
selects like what screen you want to share,
okay.
on the right-hand side, it should say share sound under options.
Okay, I see it. Okay.
Yeah, so make sure both of those are checked,
Okay.
and then
Perfect.
you can hit share.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, let's see if okay. So you guys are seeing the video the presentation again?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'll quickly I know I I apologize for the I guess miscommunication there. So I'll just play this video really quick. This is the three species clip.
You're not in presenter mode.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
There we go. We can see it now in presenter.
Okay. So yeah, those were the three different species calling at the same time. And then this is I'll try to play just short clips of these species again. So this is that northern leopard frog call. And again, this one kind of sounds more like a snore, like rattle sound. So you can kind of hear the different chuckles that this one is, kind of resonating. And then here is this is the eastern spadefoot. And again, these are the species that they kind of form these massive migrations or these massive aggregations of breeding when they go to these ponds. Well, it sounds like they're making kind of like a quonk sound. So again, very unique, just a little bit different than some of the other species that we have. And then this is an interesting one. So this one's called a bird voice tree frog. And it's called the bird voice tree frog because they sound like kind of like a bird whistle. So it's pretty, once you hear this one, it's pretty obvious for how this frog got its name. Yeah, so this one again sounds like a bird, and I've been able to replicate this species in the wild and get these frogs to call back too, which is really fun. And then some frogs do so some frogs don't call, kind of like I was mentioning before. So and some frogs do call, but they live in these really, really loud environments. So for example, this is a species that utilizes what's called foot flagging, and they'll utilize this in scenarios where when it's really loud. So a lot of these species live in these streams next to waterfalls. And so there's this kind of constant loud noise that's being kind of resonated in the environment. And so when it's calling, females or other males might not be able to hear it. So it'll start using kind of different signals to try to, attract mates, for example. So this is a very unique way to kind of go around situations where calling might not be effective. And this is the Brazilian torrent frog. So this species actually, again, utilizes both. But I'm just going to play a video of kind of what that foot flagging behavior looks like in nature, which is a very cool, I guess, adaptation, if you will, considering this is going to, again, kind of increase the chances of this, species finding mates in the wild.
The torrent frog. Like most frogs, he calls out to attract a mate. But when his peeps are drowned out, the male has a backup method. If you can't be heard, then a little leg wave might work.
So yeah, so that was a pretty cool example of some frogs using multiple signals at the same time to again increase that chance to finding a successful mate. And so again, so what is a frog? And this also comes back to some skeletal morphology. So there are some unique bones that frogs have that the other vertebrates do not have. So for example, they have a bunch of, I guess, fused vertebrae towards the end of their vertebrae. So that would be like koala vertebrae. So they have a bone called this urostyle, which basically is not like any other group of animals, and it kind of fits inside the pelvic girdle. So essentially, this kind of explains why frogs don't have a tail. Otherwise, most animals, this wouldn't be infused within the pelvic girdle, and it would probably be what we would see as a tail. And they also frogs all have this reduced amount of vertebrae. Salamanders have 12, anywhere between 12 to 18 vertebrae, while caecilians, those weird worm-looking amphibians, they have anywhere from 95 to 200 to 300 vertebrae. So frogs have an extremely reduced number of vertebrae over time as they've evolved, which kind of make them again unique and different from other amphibians and reptiles and organisms. And they also don't have any teeth on the lower jaw. So a lot of other animals have teeth on the upper and lower mandible. So frogs only have teeth on don't have teeth on the lower jaw. It's only on the upper side. And so here are some examples of just, some pretty drastic, extreme frog diversity. So on the left, this is a slide just kind of showing kind of more tropical frogs that kind of live in these more moist, wet environments. So on the top left, this is an African species. It's called a black rain frog. You can see in the middle, we have a Brazilian horned toad. And then this species from South America. And then from Asia, we have this weird species called a purple frog. I think it was discovered not too long ago, but a very weird species. They live most of their lives underground. And then on this bright yellow frog on the left, it's called an Indian bullfrog. So you can see that these frogs can come in all sorts of different colors. And in the middle, you can see there's that example of that Suriname toad again. Again, very bizarre shape compared to what you would think of as a normal, typical body plan of a frog. And then, of course, we have these, beautiful dart frogs that come in all sorts of different colors, which are very charismatic and very popular in the pet trade. And then we also have species that are maybe considered more dry adapted. So we have a green toad on the left, and this is a cane toad. This is a really big species. Native to South America, very toxic species. And then we have things like those spadefoots. I showed you a clip of one calling earlier, which are generally considered more dry adapted. So they basically live underground in kind of these environments that don't receive as much rain, and they only really come out during these like really large rain events in the summertime. And then we have another example of a rain frog that's more dry adapted compared to the one that was on the last slide. And then we have this Colorado river toad and white street frog. So this is an Australian species. It's not a toad. It's more of a frog. So it kind of has more moist skin, but they typically live in these more kind of these drier environments, you could say. So again, we have species that kind of live in more wet environments and species that live in drier environments. And with that, we have incredible diversity. And this is an honorable mention frog. This is called the turtle frog. So they are native to Australia, Western Australia, and no one really knows much about the species at all. This species you would consider them data deficient, and not a lot of, I guess, we don't really know much about their ecology. And it's because this species also does live underground for most of its life. So it's very secretive, and it's really, really hard to witness the species in the wild. But what we do know is that they eat termites, so they're termite specialists. And they also have this direct development where they have this tadpole and toadlet stage that comes out of the egg, right? So they don't really have the situation where they have free roaming tadpoles that are like in ponds. And this is probably happens because this species again is more dry adapted. Maybe there's, not permanent bodies of water long enough to hold tadpoles. So maybe over time they've kind of evolved this way to kind of skip that phase. And then frogs also have very powerful camouflage, right? So this is on the top left. These are two pictures of the same species. This is called a Malayan leaf toad. You can see that for, almost 100%, this thing looks like a leaf. If you were in the wild walking around in the woods, I would even have a hard time finding this species because it looks like any other leaf on the ground, unless you look at it from a different angle, of course. But then you also have frogs that are blending into plant matter and moss. So this is a cool example. This is called a mossy frog, and they're not only does their color really match some of their background, but they also have this like texturized skin that kind of mimics the way moss kind of looks, right? So it's kind of again very texturized and helps it blend even more into its background. And then maybe some of you might be familiar if you're in the United States, but we also have gray tree frogs, which do incredibly well against like bark and woods and wooded backgrounds. So again, they kind of have this very cool gray kind of blotch pattern, which helps it kind of mimic kind of the wood it might sit upon. So a lot of frogs do have camouflage, which is very, very, very interesting and very unique. And there's also a frog species called a bird poop frog, and this is a very bizarre frog. So basically it's mimicking bird poop. So it's basically it likes to hang out in these areas where a lot of birds might be pooping on the rocks. And so basically kind of the idea here is not only are they, hard to find because they kind of mimic this bird poop background, but they might not look as appetizing to predators. What predator is going to want to eat a frog that looks like poop? So that's kind of a funny, more funny example. But yeah, so frogs also come in these very, very easy to see colors. They're very bright, and these basically are kind of these colors are kind of used as signals for other animals. So we call it aposematism, and which is basically like kind of a warning coloration to predators to say, hey, like I'm a dangerous food to eat. So this usually typically includes colors like oranges and reds, and even blues. And these colors are kind of meant to contrast strongly with the background, so they're very, very, very easy to see. And typically, a lot of these frogs that have these colorations are toxic. So it is a good indicator again to predators to say, hey, do not eat me. You will not have a good time. But of course, there's frogs that will mimic these colors that aren't actually toxic. Again, these colors are really useful signals to frogs to, I guess, protect them from being eaten. And then a cool example of kind of an extreme of these dart frogs is called the golden poison arrow frog, um, and it's the largest of the dart frogs. I think the statistic is one individual has enough, I guess, toxin to kill anywhere between 10 to 12 people. There's a lot of, I guess, there used to be a lot of indigenous people that would kind of use these frogs for hunting purposes, where they would kind of use the secretions on their skin on the tip of their arrows, which would again would basically help, kill animals they were searching for, which is a pretty unique thing. But then also frogs can be all sorts of shapes and sizes. So some frogs can be extremely small. This is a species that was discovered in 2012, and they're a fraction of the size of a dime, right? So you can imagine how hard the species is to, witness in nature. It would probably be very easy to overlook something like this. But frogs can also be very, very large. This is the largest species of frog in the world. It's called the Goliath frog, and they can be well over a foot long. And sometimes some of these bigger frogs are again kind of pointed on for food. So this frog is actually, I guess, considered endangered now, but kind of the primary cause leading to their endangerment has been because of things like the food and the pet trade. So again, some of these frogs that are really big, they're really popular in food, but that can also lead to declines, right? And it's just some basic vocabulary. So I also like to kind of tell people people are always like, what's the difference between a frog and a toad? So frogs refer to like a smooth skin aquatic jumper. So this is what you would think of as like a typical frog, right? So the genus would be Rana and the family is Ranidae. So this is like what kind of what it means to be a true frog. And they all kind of have the same body plan. They kind of have like a pointier snout. They all kind of have the same body shape, if you will. Again, they're all very, very slimy usually, and they're pretty aquatic compared to other frogs. And actually, if you think about most frog characters that are in like children books or in TV shows, a lot of these frog characters are based on these true frogs or these ranid frogs. So like Kermit the Frog would probably be based on this these frogs that we consider true frogs. And then you have characters like Toad and Frog. Again, this frog here is probably based on like a bullfrog or a green frog, which is would be considered a true frog. And then toads would be different from frogs in that they refer to like more of a warty, dry skin, terrestrial hopper. So they're maybe not as much jumping, but more of a hopping situation. So th these are two examples of, some toads that live in the US. We have Fowler's toads and Great Plains toads. Again, you can kind of see the representation and from frog and toad. We kind of have this like bump or this wart on toad. But this vocabulary is not really super definite. And again, I think the way I put it is not all frogs are toads, but all toads are frogs. So I would be careful with how you define which one over the other, because you could take an eastern green tree frog, which would generally be a frog, right? But someone might say, okay, like well, their skin's kind of bumpy and warty per se. And same with spadefoots. People refer to spadefoots as spadefoot toads, but again, they have like usually pretty smooth skin, and they're pretty much only exclusively using these aquatic environments during the breeding season. So there are exceptions for this, but I would just generally use frogs as a generic term. So it's totally okay to call a toad a frog, in my opinion. Um, and then you have things like, you have these group called spadefoots, which essentially use, they're called spadefoot because they have a shovel on their foot, which they use for digging. So you can see in this photo right here, if you were to turn its hind feet over, you'd see this black keratinized piece on their webbing. So they use that again to dig in under the ground. And we have a bunch of species in North America, but what's really cool about the species, in my opinion, is they smell like peanut butter. So if you were to, I found them before, like on the road, and I picked them up. And it is true, like when you smell them and smell your hands afterwards, it smells like peanut butter. So don't ask me why they smell like peanut butter, but they do. But yeah, there's again some pretty common differences between spadefoots and other frogs, mostly in their head shape and kind of how much their eyes kind of pop out of their head. What really cool about this species is I guess their ability to adapt to changes in the environment. So uh, basically, these tadpoles they basically have what's called phenotypic plasticity, which means it's one genotype that can code for multiple phenotypes. So what this means is under different environmental scenarios, you can have one body plan or the other. So in a situation where there's a lot of rain and there's a lot of vegetation in the environment, typically these tadpoles will they will remain eating plants because there's plentiful food around. But in situations where ponds may be drying, and if they accidentally eat shrimp, they will can sometimes turn into what are called these carnivore morphs, which will essentially make them, I guess, grow a lot faster, grow a lot bigger, develop different morphological characters in their teeth anatomy, and they will actually cannibalize their own and eat each other. And again, this is kind of giving them kind of this advantage in situations where environmental conditions might not be ideal for survival. So this is kind of a cool example in how certain frogs can, I guess, adapt in certain situations. And I guess how am I on time? I guess I know it's 9:55. I wanted to ask real quick.
We can open up for some questions if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, it's totally fine. I didn't get through everything, but so I
I
apologize.
can't hear
I'm
him. Go
happy to
ahead.
answer some questions.
I don't think so. Oh, I don't know what he said. Can you repeat what you said? Oh, you were muted.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
I didn't
That's
hear
all
what
right.
you were saying.
Oh, we asked if you want to open up to some questions.
Yeah, yeah, it's fine.
Okay,
Okay.
so we have one. How do they trap so much air in their throat?
That's a really good question. So they basically they basically kind of use, I guess, pressure. So it's kind of like if I kind of think about like, like humans, like we can take in a deep breath and then kind of release that air. So frogs are using something similar to that, but they are able to not only they don't really release that air, they recycle the same air. So you know that some frogs have these vocal sacs. So what happens is they will retain this air inside their body, but they'll like recycle that air. So like it'll go from this negative pressure to this positive pressure, and they're basically recycling this air back and forth. And that's actually what's kind of making their vocal sac and their anatomy inside in their mouths are actually what's making the sound. So they're actually they're reusing the same air when they're calling, which is actually kind of cool. They're not taking a breath each time they call. So that's hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, thank you. Okay, our next question is, can you try imitating some of the croaking of the frog?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So okay. So the bird voice. Okay. So the bird voice tree frog. Remember that one? So I can do that one pretty well. I can try. So all right. Let's see. I So that one's pretty easy to do. It's just like it's just a whistle. And then those green tree frogs, they kind of sound like kind of an oink oink sound. So I can imitate those pretty well too. So I'll do one. I'll do a call, their call. So they go oink 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 oink. And the reason why I would say I'm pretty good at doing that call is because I guess I've been practicing for multiple years since I've been working on that species. So that's there's a lot of frogs I cannot imitate, and I'd be pretty embarrassed if I try to imitate them. So I think I'll give you those two for now. Yeah, there are there any other questions?
Yes, we have a list.
Oh
So
my
this
gosh. Okay.
question is,
I'm really sorry. I was gonna go into like conservation examples, but I think I totally went over time, so I
No, don't
apologize.
worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, so the next question is, why do tadpoles lose their tails when they're becoming frogs?
That's a really good question, and I would answer that to say so frogs don't really need tails, right? If you think about it, so these tadpole tails kind of function for I guess movement in the water. So they're using their tails to generate speed and direction, right? They can kind of twist and turn their tails to move around their environment. And so if you think about a terrestrial frog, why would a frog need a tail if they can jump around and hop around? So essentially, I would say they don't really have a function for their tail when they're adults. So that's probably the best reason for why they don't have a tail. And that would probably be different than salamanders. Salamanders do have tails, but a lot of salamanders are aquatic. And they do have specific functions for their tail if they are terrestrial. So I would say the reasons why they don't have tails is because they wouldn't need a tail to begin with. Yeah. And
Okay.
yeah.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was gonna add something, but it's okay.
Okay, our next question is, what is your favorite frog species and why?
Oh man, okay. These are hard questions. So my favorite frog species would probably be probably that crawfish frog I showed you earlier. So that's a species that primarily lives in crayfish burrows, which is super unique in terms of their ecology. But they're also very, very pretty. They have this like reticulated pattern, very, very vibrant, and it contrasts very well with the two different colors it has. But I would say that's my favorite frog because I'm biased, I've worked on them before, but also they're very, very unique. They're the only frog that uses crayfish burrows for shelters. And there's so many other unique things about them that make them cool. They travel very long distances to breed in ponds, and they'll go actually back to the same burrows they came from before. So they can they reuse their same burrows over and over again. So it's kind of like they're selecting a home, if you will. So I think I think that would be my favorite species is a crawfish frog.
Okay, so we kind of, it's already 10 o'clock right now, but we can still keep going if you'd like. Is that okay with that?
Yeah, it's totally up to you. If you're bored and you're sick of hearing about frogs, you can kick me out. But if you
Oh,
No,
you want to ask some more questions, feel free.
of
I'm
course.
totally happy to
So
answer.
another question that we have from the chat is, do you have a pet frog? We see that little like cage thing
Yeah,
set up
okay.
back there. Can you
You
explain what
yeah.
that's what
So I
it is?
have you remember the picture of the blue dart frog I showed earlier in the presentation? So I have five of those,
Oh
and I
my
also have
God.
I know I would show you, but I don't have like I can't I don't think I can carry my laptop over there. Uh, but I also have those the ones that are most toxic. Those they're called the Phyllobates genus. I have some of those too. They're the bright orange ones. So I have two. Those are the two species I own, and they're set up in these like terrariums with a bunch of live plants. And it's been really. I've had them for a few years now. It's been really fun. It's like having a little rainforest in your house, little ecosystem. So it's been super fun to have those, and they're not toxic in captivity, right? So those frogs get their toxins from eating ants, and they synthesize those toxins um, basically in their bodies after they eat them. So that's kind of a diet-based way of becoming toxic. So that's and I feel bad because I wish I could pull them out and show you, but it's they're I don't they're just a very like kind of a sensitive species. I'd rather not I guess not pick them up, but yeah. So I encourage you to look at more photos of dart frogs.
okay,
But yeah,
that's
good
pretty
question.
cool. Okay, so our next question is, how hard is it to do the micro CT scan? And they said, I assume the frog tends to jump around. What methods do you use to keep the frog still?
That's a very good question. So when I did those micro CT scans, so how hard is it to do them? They're once you learn how to I guess work the machine and kind of figure out the settings and how to best set it up to where it's going to capture the type of data you want to collect, it's not super difficult. But to answer the second part of that question, so those are not so the frogs don't move at all because they're not technically alive. So I was using museum specimens that were collected years ago, and I would put those specimens in those machines. So I don't know if it would be safe to put a live frog in there, and it wouldn't really work with a live frog because the live frog would be moving around, which would mess up the scans. But yeah, the reason why those were able to, I guess, work was because we're using museum specimens for those scans. Yeah,
All right,
good
cool.
question.
All right, so our next question that we have is, are poison dart frogs, sorry, completely covered in their toxin, or do they release the toxin whenever they sense danger?
That's a good question too. So poison. So I kind of like to they it's it would definitely be the situation where they're just constantly going to be toxic. So no matter it's not a situation where they release their toxins. It's just in there. It's just within their skin, right? So if something were to eat the frog and it had wasn't prepared to be eaten, there wouldn't be more toxic being released prior to that versus if the frog was aware and was trying to like run away. So to answer that question, it would be that it doesn't matter. It doesn't. It's just something that's within their skin. I will say that technically all frogs are toxic at some level. So all frogs have what are called granular glands, and these glands all secrete at some level of toxin. Some frogs are just more toxic than others. And even and all frogs have different, I guess, mechanisms for their toxins too. So toads actually have parotid glands, which these two glands that kind of beneath the top or right below their head. So if you squeeze those glands, those toxins will kind of shoot out And that's why I think like dogs and stuff that are picking up toads, once they like kind of I guess puncture or press against those glands, that's when it kind of like triggers the gland to release. So it's a little bit different per species, but for the dart frogs, it definitely it doesn't really change, and it just kind of based on their diet, and it's not really a release type of situation. So.
Okay, okay. So, Jackie said, is it true that frogs could freeze and come back to life?
Yes, so there's some species that can tolerate temporary freezing. So they've kind of adapted this, I guess, unique physiologies to be able to do such a thing. So I think it has to do with like, the way their blood circulates. But most frogs technically can't undergo freezing, or else their body will kind of shut down, their cells will kind of burst. But yeah, there are some very cool exceptions to that. So yeah, there are some frogs, especially that live, closer to the poles, that are able to undergo freezing, but not for super long periods of time, I don't think. But yeah, so technically, I would say yes, that is true. And when I say freezing, it's not they're not totally frozen. It's kind of like more of like the outside of their body being frozen. But yeah.
That's very cool. Okay, so someone else said, how long is a frog's tongue?
How long is a frog's tongue? Yeah, I mean, not as long as you'd think. I don't, I would say, it's totally different per species. Um, but their tongues, I would, yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I would say, yeah, it depends on the species, but it's not like it's not long like a snake tongue. If you actually look up um, frog tongues online, you'll notice that they kind of have like a weird, they're kind of they kind of have like a hinge to them, so they kind of like flap over. The end kind of flaps over itself, and that's kind of a way for when it does like catch its prey or an insect or whatever it's eating. It kind of like is that extra boost to kind of grip and kind of like attack their prey. But yeah, I think um, yeah, I don't. Their tongues aren't very long. They don't really, I wouldn't say, go very much past like when their mouth is open. They probably don't really go very much past their snout, because we're more so relying on them catching it with their mouths rather than their tongue.
Okay, okay. So, do other animals end up in pitfall traps?
Yes, that's a really good question. So mostly those are targeted for reptiles and amphibians. So you'll see a lot of animals. There'll be snakes, lizards, salamanders, of course, frogs. But also there can be bycatch. So there can be animals we don't really necessarily are targeting for. So we do like during that drift fence study, we ended up catching a lot of voles and a lot of mice, and like really small mammals. But there are ways to kind of there's a ways to get around that. So we usually put in like a little pole or a string on in the bucket. So if we do catch a mouse by accident, it can kind of like climb back up the string to get out, because we're not really interested in the mammals, since it's kind of a frog related project. But the frogs definitely aren't gonna they're not gonna be using the string to climb out of the bucket. So it's a good way to kind of help release things you're not trying to catch, you could say.
That's good to know. So, the next question is, have you ever wanted to go catch a turtle frog?
I have, yeah. I need to visit Australia first, which would be a super long plane flight. So, I think yeah, maybe someday I'll be able to catch one, but that'd probably be one of the coolest species, in my opinion, to see in the wild would be a turtle frog. Because I guarantee you way less than 1% of the human population has seen a turtle frog. So, it'd be a very rewarding experience. So I hope to someday.
I hope you do too. So, the next question by Jennifer is, does absorbing the eggs hurt the frog?
I would say no. So usually when I think that question relates back to that Suriname toad that was reabsorbing those eggs that were on her back. So yeah, that most likely does not hurt the frog at all, especially since that's something that's probably been evolved for, a super long time frame. So in terms of, that being painful, I would say absolutely not. Like that would not hurt the frog in any way. That would be considered like a pretty normal thing for that frog species to do. Good question though.
That was our last question of today.
Just
So,
had a lot of good questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
so thank you so much for your presentation today. We really appreciate you giving us this time to learn from you. And for the participants, please join us in our webinar. It's already in progress with Jordan Gray, and they're talking about Turtle Survival Alliance ambassadors. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate you
I
too.
hope I hope everyone will go out and catch some frogs this coming spring. That's my only wish for you guys, or listen to them at least. Yeah, it was nice talking to everyone. I'll catch you another time.